It's interesting.
Welcome to our final panel on the challenges of AI for research, teaching, and civic life, and perhaps what universities can do about it. I'm Stefan Lavertu, Associate Director, or incoming Associate Director at the Chase Center and Professor of Public Policy. Once again, we have distinguished panelists, faculty, and public intellectuals who are experts in this area, and it's my honor to welcome them. Closest to me is Katherine Elkins, Professor of Comparative Literature and Humanities at Kenyon College, Director of the Integrated Program in Humane Studies, founding co-director of the AI CoLab, also at Kenyon. She's a PI on numerous grants and projects relating to AI, and her research examines AI safety, governance, and the social implications of emerging technologies. Next to Katherine is Michael Inzlicht. Turns out he's French-Canadian like me. Professor of Psychology at the University of Toronto and research lead at the Schwartz Reisman Institute for Technology and Society. He is consistently recognized among the most cited psychologists in the world. His research sits at the intersection of motivation, self-control, and technology. And finally, on the end is Sean Westwood, Professor of Government at Dartmouth, Director of the Polarization Research Lab. His research focuses on political behavior, public opinion, and artificial intelligence implications for democracy. His current work explores AI's effects on political communication and opinion measurement, and he's widely published in prominent academic and public outlets. Indeed, he has some of the most heavily cited articles in my home discipline of political science. So each panelist will go for 20 minutes, then we'll have 25 minutes of Q&A, and then you will be set free to mingle with one another. Katherine.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for having me. I'm going to try to advance my screen here. Okay, so I run direct a 50-year-old program at Kenyon College called the Integrated Program in Humane Studies. We have a first-year course that looks a lot like Columbia's core curriculum. And in 2016, I and a collaborator, who I'll mention in a moment, revamped the intermediate and advanced coursework to create a human-centered AI curriculum. And so I'm going to start with a little bit of a provocation. I want to tell you that Claude told me that you all will hate Harari. I don't know if that is true. That I should, I didn't advance. Okay, so I'm going to get this right. So Yuval Harari, as you might know, suggests that much of democracy is based on an outdated notion of human nature. And so maybe you all will hate this, I'm not sure. But I do want to say, after having taught human-centered AI for 10 years and also taught for 10 years before that in a much more traditional kind of core curriculum, I do feel that the old ways are not sufficient and that we do need to update our notions of human nature to take into account some of this that I'm talking about here, behavioral economics, moral judgment informed by some of Jonathan Haidt's work. My own work began modeling the shapes of stories, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but basically stories hack the human using emotion, and that is what I look at and model in the lab and have written a book about, as well as some of this modeling of complex systems, of social networks, different ways in which people can exert power, information cascades, et cetera, et cetera. So much of the upper division courses now build on those foundations of the big questions from Plato all the way up to the present, but we add this second layer. So one of the things that I want to say is that for quite a while now, AI systems, first with recommender systems and now more with generative AI, are able to model, predict, and ultimately shape human behavior. And we talk a lot about teaching critical thinking, but I think being a forecaster and being able to predict the future is just as important. So a lot of what I do with my students is actually thinking about forecasting and testing forecasting. And I also want to make sure that our students are able to model, predict, and shape at least as well as AI, because if not, we will be modeled, predicted, and shaped by our AI systems. So this is kind of the basic part of what I want to talk about as we move forward. I also want to say, when we talk about critical thinking, I am one of those people who wonders what we mean. And I sometimes think that we begin to associate critique with critical thinking. And sometimes that critique begins to seem more and more not critical thinking at all, because everybody is repeating themselves with that critical thinking. So I want to think about forecasting and looking towards the future and updating one's priors and taking from the past, but also deciding when the past can't anticipate the future. That's very much what we have done in terms of updating our own curriculum. I just want to talk briefly about ways in which generative AI may actually really problematize civic education. So here on the left, I have ideas about exploring diversity of viewpoints, pushing back, encountering challenges, all of these kinds of things. And then I tried to pair it with some of the latest research that we know about generative AI. We know that generative AI can be sycophantic. It will repeat back to you. Most of the models, aside from Grok, are extremely liberal-leaning. It actually tends towards the middle. We are not able to generate as diverse opinions in general as society. As people more and more have as an interlocutor AI, I'm very concerned about what this means for civic education. And so I think this is part of what we need to consider. I just want to point out that you can find a lot of my work elsewhere. In particular, you can hear about our latest Schmidt Science project on NPR over there. I did do an interview with Forbes about human-centered AI about a year ago. So there are other places. And then there's this article that John Chun, my collaborator, and I wrote about the crisis of artificial intelligence in 2023. So there are other places where you're able to pick up and see more. So I'm going to go really, since I only have a few minutes, I'm going to go at really kind of warp speed. And what I want to do, since I know many of you are trained in the history of ideas, is move back and forth between the forest and the trees, theory and practice, and show you that really the entire curriculum is not skills-driven, it is ideas-driven, and kind of give you that big picture. So one of the things that I want to argue is in 2016, when we decided to update our curriculum, one of the reasons is that all my students wanted to be like me, and all they knew to do was go and get a PhD. And so I sent them, they got into Harvard, Chicago, top programs, and then they could not get a job. And I wanted to think about what it means to offer many different paths to their future that are not just academia. At the same time, my collaborator, John Chun, had done startups in Silicon Valley. His last startup was funded by In-Q-Tel, the CIA. He created one of the first web-based VPNs, sold it to Symantec, and had retired to Gainbury, Ohio, to raise children for 10 years as my husband. And he came out of retirement in 2016 to help us reshape the upper division. And his idea was, as an engineer, more and more key issues facing us revolve around technology, but we are not training the next generation to understand it deeply enough to actually weigh in. You can look at congressional testimony and Mark Zuckerberg, and you can see people have no idea how this works. And so he really wanted to build the same intellectual framework around technology with deep engagement, not science and technology studies, but actually deep technological engagement, because he wanted to bring more voices to these conversations. And he said, engineers don't want to make these decisions, right? And so part of what we did is create this curriculum that starts with theory, and I want to say I was trained as a theorist, but also tests our theories at scale, shapes, and builds interventions. And we do all four of these, and to the extent that I can model that for our students, I do feel like that is the future of education. So I want to talk for just a minute about theorize, because I was trained as a theorist. And these are just some of the kinds of questions that I talk about. For example, and I just want to put the research here, because sometimes when I talk all about our student work, and people think it's just teaching. R1s, you have to say that a field exists because of the research. So this is not just to talk about my research, but to show you that there is now an emerging field, and there is research that fits into this field, and to give you a sense. So the AI fiction paradox, which I presented at Purdue recently at an AI conference, asks the question, why did so many tech companies take considerable legal risk to steal fiction to train on, and not only fiction, but bad fiction. I don't want to say any fiction is bad, but I mean, a lot of this is not what we would consider literary and high-quality fiction. So why did they do that, and what did they need? And then we always know that AI systems do a good job at whatever is in their training data, but actually, AIs are still pretty bad at writing good fiction, and why is that? So that's just one example. There is also this question about human-centered AI, which treats humanities and AI as an integrated field, not, as Stephen Mintz just said, as an add-on. And I was really excited to see Terence Tao, who many of you might know is a Fields medalist in mathematics, pick up on this article from 2023 and say that AI is challenging us to rethink foundational concepts. And he actually quotes our work here. So, you know, we think of people call me a humanist, but I will tell you when I'm working with other people working in AI, we all consider ourselves part of the same field, and we are all working with each other on these kinds of questions. Now, one thing I want to also be a little provocative here and suggest is that the humanities and the social sciences in general are very theory-driven. Social sciences, I do think, have done a better job incorporating quantitative methods than the humanities. So we have all of these theories, but we do need to test these theories. And one of the things that I'm most excited about with AI is AI allows our students and ourselves to test our theories at scale and empirically. And many of our theories will be wrong, but some of them will be right. And so these are the kinds of testing of our theories and actually leveraging AI to do research in the humanities and social sciences that I think are very important. Here you can see, you can go online and look at this OpenAI forum talk that I gave, which gives a lot more detail about how we are leveraging AI for social science and humanities research. And I just want to give some examples. We have known for thousands of years that stories have shapes. Now we can actually use AI to model the shapes of stories, and it turns out that they don't work how we thought they did. There is a very strong emotional component that we can surface, and I would even suggest to you that stories hack the human because they are a cognitive, emotional technology. And so this kind of thing is extremely important. But we also are bringing humanistic and social science principles to AI research. And so some of this work here is 3 and 4. Do AI systems exhibit normative ethical frameworks? We did some of the first ethical audits. What if we put these systems in autonomous weapons? How will they behave? We presented some of this work for the US AI Safety Institute, where I'm a principal investigator representing the MLA, the Modern Language Association, which is 25,000 linguists and language experts. And we actually found that these AI systems, in some instances, exhibited somewhat authoritarian tendencies. More recently, we have looked at the ways in which the language interface that we are using to work with these AI systems offer many vulnerabilities that most engineers are not looking at. And this is part of our work with the MLA, actually working with the US AI Safety Institute to design federal standards. So we are both leveraging AI for humanities and social science research, and we are using our disciplines to investigate AI. Okay. Shape. So I really enjoyed what we were already discussing about not just telling the next generation that it's their job. And this is part of the work that I do. It doesn't count as a traditional academic. It's very invisible. Right now I'm working with UNESCO on a project. One of the main questions that really concerns me is what if we are the last generation to produce culture? Not just because we won't have humans producing art, but that many of the kind of side gigs that many creatives use to support themselves while they make their art are going away, right? And so how do we support artists so we're not the last generation? Public AI is an international organization that believes that AI will not develop for the public good without real pressure, and so that is probably my most activist work that I'm doing. But I'm also working and have co-published with folks at Oxford about the issues surrounding global AI regulation, and also working here on questions of open source and with NIST. So I can talk a little bit more about the open source questions, but this is all the kind of public work that I do, that I bring my students into, and that I think is super important for us to think about. Okay, so next one. Okay. and then build. So this is probably the most exciting part, is interventions in the world, and this is also work that we do in the lab. I was just mentioning to Stefan that sometimes I feel like humanists are not trained to be good collaborators. I had to learn to be a good collaborator. I now write papers often with 15, 25 people. We don't really do that much in the humanities, and many of my humanities students are just used to thinking of their work. And so we do bring social science and humanities students into the lab in the summers to work on projects that are larger than them, with faculty from all over the world, with labs that we collaborate with. So one thing that we're working on right now is a Schmidt Science Grant, $250,000 in the first installment. That's from Eric Schmidt, Schmidt Sciences. And that project I'm really excited about, because it turns out that much of our culture has not been digitized all over the world because A, it is incredibly, the equipment is incredibly expensive. B, you need humans to do all of this meta tagging. And so we are building a system where with just a camera, people all over the world can preserve their crumbling archives and link them in an archival intelligence system so that we can move across modalities and make discoveries. And we're starting with Cajun and Creole in New Orleans and Black experience and jazz, because we're also trying to build better AI systems that have more experiences and languages and underrepresented experiences. The second example I want to give, and I really encourage you to go here, is ancdigest.org. This is actually my dad, who is in his third career an ANC Ward 3 commissioner in Washington, D.C. And I just want to give you two examples of how cool this is. He wanted to work on, this is hyperlocal, he wanted to work on sidewalks in D.C. that are not getting repaired and that people are experiencing injuries over. And he was so frustrated that the Department of Public Health would not crunch the data. And I said, Dad, just get the data and use Claude and crunch it. And he did, and so they're now trying to bring the DC government to fix the sidewalks. But he also built this website in a matter of days that takes local representatives, and it shows exactly what resolutions they're proposing, what testimonies they have given, and you can see the representatives who are doing nothing and the representatives who are doing things. So instead of voting for somebody based on their platform, and he's now got money to help build out these sites elsewhere. So this is the kind of civic intervention that I think is incredibly important. And then as just one other example, last summer we worked with faculty in Columbia using natural language processing and AI to look at the Truth and Reconciliation archive there, and students worked on it. I also have a world map here because we have students do projects using AI, and I'll give you just a little bit of an idea of what they look like. We do put them on Digital Kenyan, and we are now up to 100,000 downloads from every single country in the world. This is undergraduate research, sometimes after only a single class. It is by places like CMU and Stanford, but also all over the world by governmental agencies, and also, interestingly, by industry. And I can talk a little bit, I haven't talked much about my industry work here, but I can talk about that. And so, you know, ByteDance in places. So this is the kind of impact that I really love. Okay, I just want to give you a little bit of an example of what the student work looks like, because my students are now researchers. And if my students at a small liberal arts college are now researchers and can test their theories and create new knowledge and put it on the web and be downloaded all over the world, you guys have more resources than I do. So it's possible for everybody. And so these are the kinds of things that they're doing. They're talking about platform discourse and how it works. For example, one of my students looked at abortion conversations on Twitter and found that depending on the language you used, these are different communities using different language and not talking to each other. And you can see also, one of my favorite examples, Ben Gimbel, we actually looked at Twitter during the call of really contested elections, and we can predict, based on a kind of ringing signal, and it's a little complicated, it's on the web, which ones have more or less confidence. And then we can also see, students actually asking questions about bias and whose stories get told. And we look also at things like, one of my students looked at all of the cross-partisan AI legislation and showed that across the aisle, they almost are equivalent. We actually do not disagree about how to regulate this. We also look at things like UN General Assembly. We also look at things like let me talk about building. One of our students created a chatbot to help students navigate disability. Another student built something for Pakistan with under-resourced hospitals to help triage patients. We have investigated 17,000 conversations with AI to actually say what our relationships with AI look like. And we are spending a lot of time looking at AI as kind of an unreliable narrator to deceive and persuade. And then finally, we have students using AI to critique Kenyon, which I'm not sure that really Kenyon is excited about, but they do it, and those are some examples. And then here are just a few more examples. A student, Zach, had a very close friend who died of, I've got to really speed up, died of an opioid overdose. And so he used AI to predict who in Ohio might be most at risk. And you can see all of these other kinds of scales where we have students weighing in. We're looking at court judgments. We're looking at park deserts in Miami and documenting it. So these are all different kinds of examples. There are over 200 projects. We've done about 800 projects. We put about 200 up on the web. And so just to come back, I do think civic engagement is all for. I think that we need to theorize, but we need to test our theories. We need to shape what's happening, and we need to build. And then the more that some of us can model that in the real world, it is incredibly helpful. And that is it. Okay, thank you. I think I made it. Okay.
Get the clicker.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Just give me a minute to get set up. Okay, well, thank you all for coming and for inviting me. And also, I'm a psychologist, and for psychologists, especially social psychologists, Ohio State is this like legendary place. So I'm just so thrilled to be here. It's my first time here. So thank you for inviting me. I feel like to some extent, I, perhaps the rest of my panelists, will be kind of like the heel in WWE wrestling. The villain that's meant to provoke and get people to think. And Dr. Clune, you had a couple of words about AI earlier that I might take issue with. So you and I might be sparring a little bit. The question I'm asking is, can we think clearly about artificial intelligence, about generative AI? Is that possible? I'm going to start with some quotes. It seems to be a popular thing in this crowd. Ooh, I should gotta do this. This is written by Becca Rothfeld, who is a former philosophy PhD, now a staff writer at The New Yorker, the top of elite institutions. I hope you're ashamed of yourself and your dwindling humanity. I think it should be legally required for people to say when or if they've used AI in the process of writing something so that I can avoid it at all costs. She wrote this as a hyperbolic essay, an aesthetic, a moral essay, a call, and I think the title of the essay is, You Do Not Need to Use AI. Here's something from social media, which is always a great source of interesting, kind of a barometer of what people are feeling. I don't think it's worthwhile to engage with the possibility of AI being used for good, rhetorically, when the guys with power over the technology and who profit from it are white supremacists, eugenicists, and pedophiles. This is, by the way, this is not a rando. This is Tej Rai, who is a professor of psychology, who was actually employed at the business school at UCSD, a former editor at Science. And because of language like this, we've got headlines, like this. Just last weekend, Sam Altman's house targeted in a second, not one, 2 Molotov cocktails thrown at his house. An Indianapolis city councilor says his home was shot at 13 times. No data center sign left behind. I'm going to argue this is not healthy. And the question I have is, why is a normal technology causing so much outrage. I've got this computer, normal technology. I came in today, a friend of mine drove me in a car, normal technology. AI, I argue, is normal technology. What do you mean normal technology? AI is an amoral machine wearing the skin of a human. Nothing good can come of it. It is evil and should be destroyed. This is not a hypothetical. This is something that someone said to me. So what is happening here? What is happening with our discourse about technology, about a tool that could be used for good, that could be used for evil? So before I answer that question, or at least try to address the question, I want to show a different way how we could be discussing AI. And I'll be using an example from my own research, but I won't spend too much time on this, although this is what I normally do. This is the kind of work I do in my lab. So another way is possible, and that would be what I'd consider a cost-benefit analysis of, hold your breath, AI-generated empathy. Right? Some of you are going to be appalled that I would have AI and empathy together. All right? I do not think machines have empathy. I don't think they have emotions, nor do I think that they are conscious. But they can string together words that make people feel. And is that good or bad? Let's find out. First, let's just sketch out the problem. People are lonely, often friendless. The numbers vary by poll. This was done, I think, it was done in 2023 by Pew. 8% of Americans say they don't have one single friend, not one. That stat makes me choke up a bit. This is more true for men than for women, and it's more true for older people than for younger people. Then we have those in society who are left behind, the elderly. So I collaborate with a company that services, helps elderly people who are living at home. And the leader of this organization told me that many of his clients don't see a single person ever other than the people who deliver their food. You've got rural dwellers, people who live out in the country, where there's literally there's no people around, or very few people around. And then you have shift workers, people who keep our cities up at night, make the electricity go, the water system's running. They often work shifts, and they cannot, by definition, they're reverse schedules than the rest of us, and they have trouble making friends, trouble having connection. They have any mental health issues? Good luck getting a therapist. So we wondered, could empathic AI, and by that I mean statements generated by AI that are empathic in nature, can they help? Can they heal? Can they help people who have needs that are not being met? Another stat I didn't put up there is that a recent poll showed that 50% of women in the United States who are trying to seek mental health help cannot, for various reasons, be it affordability, be it scheduling, being therapists that don't have room, etc. So again, can empathy help at all? Can empathic AI, help at all? So I decided to find out with one of my students. This is my student, Daria Ovsianikova. And we ran a study, a very simple study. And what we did was we created what we call 10 empathy scenarios. What is an empathy scenario? A scenario is just a case, a story that would elicit empathy in its listener. So here's one story. I'm really worried about my mother. She is 81 years old. She's experienced cognitive decline. She lives alone. And I'm worried because last week she told me she got lost. And I don't live in the same city as her. I don't know what to do. That could be one. Another one, empathy, often we think of it as only meeting suffering. It's also something we can meet to joy, to pleasure. It could be something like, I'm so proud of my son. He got a 99 on his physics exam, and he's well on his way to getting into his college of choice. True story, that's me. So I'm proud. And so that would be, these are empathy scenarios. And then we had people respond to these scenarios with empathy, with compassion. And they wrote out, we gave them instructions, respond compassionately, use about 50 to 75 words. And then we had I think we had 20 people, and we picked the 5 best ones per scenario. And then we had ChatGPT, I think at that point it was 4.0, with the exact same instructions. And we just took we iterated, we gave them the 5 responses. And then we had a group of third-party observers rate. They see the empathy scenario, they see response A, they see response B, and they say, which one's better? Which one's higher in compassion, higher in empathy? So it's a bit hard to see. This is rated empathy here on the Y. Brown is AI, white is human. And it's very, very clear that third parties are evaluating those statements produced by AI as being more compassionate, more caring. Now, what happens if people know it's AI? This is where they're blinded. When they know about AI, that it's an AI generating the statements, they still say it's better, although admittedly, the AI takes a hit. We go from non-transparent, where they don't know it's an AI, to transparent, they know it's an AI, it goes down. Humans, on the other hand, go up a little bit. Nonetheless, the AI still have an advantage. Like, okay, doctor, these are lay people, they're not therapists, they're not experts at delivering empathy. What about you compare the best possible humans out there? And now what we got was crisis line responders, people who, in Canada, kind of man telephones for people who are suicidal or have other mental health emergencies. And we had them do the exact same thing, and the same thing emerged. A massive advantage for AI over humans. And by the way, these are third parties. We've done this now with first persons. You come in with your own problems, and you unload, and you can either get an AI or a human to respond. And you know it's an AI, you know it's a human. And what we find is that people feel more cared for, more heard, more validated by an AI than by a human, at least in the short term. Now, I'm not trying to say this is a solution. There are pros and cons. Here's just a list of pros and cons. So pros, it helps people feel heard. The machine is always available in the middle of the night. Like last night, I had trouble sleeping. I was thinking about this talk and worrying. I can go to my AI to get some empathy. We actually find that AI is less biased than humans. I know there's a norm, a stereotype that AI is more biased, more stereotyped. Guess what? Humans are also stereotyping. Racism doesn't come from LLMs, all right? They're also indefatigable. But there are many negatives too. And if I had a full discussion, I would talk about them at length. Are we crowding out AI friends? If young people start relying on AI for their friendships, for their empathy, will they be avoiding hanging out with real friends? Sycophancy, it's a problem we're hearing not a lot now from tech companies. These AIs are far too agreeable, far too flattering. Not great. It can be used as a tool for manipulation. Hypothetical, this is just a hypothetical. Imagine a tech titan with a political project who then has technology that is being used widely for empathic reasons. This tool could then be used for mass manipulation, a major problem. And then finally, this is a provocative thought generated by my friend and colleague Paul Bloom. Is it possible that loneliness is functional, just like pain is functional? Maybe we don't want to make loneliness go away, in the sense that it might lead us to not change our behaviors in the way that would allow us to connect with other people, right? A pro and cons analysis. When I posted work like this, I got a response like this. Lots of words just to say you're a human hater. All right, so and this is really the topic of what I want to talk about, not the empathic AI, although I'm happy to talk about that as well. I want to talk about this outrage, what is going on. What we think is going on is that AI has become moralized. It's no longer a regular attitude. It's no longer an item that you just evaluate, like snow tires. Snow tires have got pros and cons, and I make a judgment. AI is seen as something different. This kind of technology is seen as something different, and we think it's become moralized. By that, we mean it's prescriptive. there are rules around AI, and you should or should not avoid it, these prescriptive rules. Another hallmark of moralization is consequence insensitivity. Opposition persists even when benefits clearly outweigh risks. Pedophilia is moralized, rightfully so, and we don't judge, pros and cons. We're like, forbidden. Is AI in that same level? Emotional. When you break a rule, it's often met with resistance, disgust, outrage, and contempt for the rule violator. So we decided to examine this. This is my student, Victoria Oldenburgo de Mayo, with a paper that's under review now. And the first question we want to ask is, how does the media discuss AI? Does it use a moral lens to discuss it? Is opposition to AI moral? How do we ascertain that? Is that opposition domain general, or is it actually sensitive to the particularities of any one technology? And finally, does AI moralization have personal costs, and I would argue societal costs? So the first thing we did was we simply we looked at all headlines, media headlines from 2018 to 2024 to see how the media discusses various topics, including AI. And then we coded each of the topics in terms of their use of moralized language. So an example of moralized language that we heard earlier today is enslaved, subjugated, destroy, hurt, harm, shouldn't. And what we found was that, so something that's not moralized is interior design, but you still see sometimes there are moral language used when discussing moral language, discussing interior design. So that's our control. Another control would be something like abortion, which we know is moralized and maybe should be moralized. You see this all the way up there. Where does AI stand? AI stands about the same as GMO foods, COVID-19, and more than vaccines. And when I say moral language, it's moral language in terms of vice. Here is an example. The great AI heart heist, stolen. Copyright law is complicated in today's age. You could use this language, you could use more neutral language as well. So is it any wonder that the public sees AI in a certain way when certain kinds of language is used to discuss what I would argue is normal technology? The next thing we did was we got a representative sample of Americans and a few samples now, and we described various AI technologies. I'm just showing you four. So we've got just a chatbot that might exist on a Walmart website, AI used for creative purposes, AI art, AI used for legal decision-making, such as judgments or parole decisions, and finally, and most perhaps controversially, AI companions, AI friends. And what we find is, actually, only a minority of people oppose each one of these technologies. The most accepted one is just, is a chatbot. And the most opposed is AI being used for companion and romantic purposes. This was done, we had two samples of this, and this was done, let's say, 6 to 8 months ago. Only a minority opposes AI. We then asked each participant a number of questions about the extent to which they moralize this technology. AI, so for example, the chatbot should be prohibited, no matter how great the benefits and minor the risks from allowing it. An AI companion should be prohibited, et cetera, et cetera. We also asked them, even if everyone was using AI, would you still think it's forbidden? And we had a number of other questions. Here's just one example question. And what we find is that 21% of the people, of all respondents, in fact, moralize, and they moralize to greater or lesser degrees. But what's interesting is that a majority of opposers moralize. So majority of the people in this representative sample who oppose the technology, they do so on moral grounds. And they say no matter what, and by that I mean they say no matter what the benefits and how few the costs, it should still be opposed. The next thing we did was, if you'll notice, each of these technologies is a little bit different, and opposition to it might be a little bit different. So the reasons I might oppose AI art is, well, it's putting creatives out of business, maybe there'll be no more creative class, and companions, there's something morally wrong about, love between a human and a machine. They're all peculiar reasons for opposing them. But when we model opposition across these four, what we see is they're highly, highly correlated. And the reasons kind of fall away. When we ask people who moralize why they moralize, they don't just say because it's vulgar, because it's immoral. They'll bring up reasons. But if you argue with the reasons, for example, please someone bring up the environmental cost of AI, which we know from good data now is not a real fact anymore. But if you tell this to people, they will turn red and say you're lying, you know what you're talking about. Finally, is AI moralization costly? This is a little kind of toy study. But so bear with me. So what we did was we measured our AI moralization, and then 3 to 18 months later, we put people through a little paradigm where they could read an essay, evaluate the essay, and grade the essay. And we told them that we'd graded these essays already. We had professional graders grade it. And if you come within 5 percentage points of these expert graders, you will get a reward. So they're incentivized to get this right. And by the way, would you like to use Grade AI to help? In this Grade AI, we tell them how amazing it is and how accurate it is, et cetera, et cetera. What we find is that our non-moralizers, a large majority of them are willing to use it. For the moralizers, a large majority, I think about less than half are willing to use it for those who moralize. Okay? Now, don't think about this in terms of personal benefit or personal cost. Think about it societally as well. If you moralize AI, will you be okay for it in decisions that could save lives, such as like detecting tumors in a radiology graph? If you moralize, you might not be. All right, so let me answer the question that was posed to each of us. What are the challenges AI poses to civic life? I think there are pros and cons. There are many, many challenges and benefits too. Challenges to safety, right? Right down the hall for me is Nobel laureate Geoffrey Hinton, considered the godfather of AI. He's worried about existential risk from AI. So we should be listening and paying attention to it. Dignity and meaning. My own work has shown that exerting yourself, effort is really, really important. And if you take the effort away, we don't feel as attached to our own work. And does human life become meaningless? Employment, of course, social connection, these are all challenges. But there are benefits too, including to safety, right? Autonomous self-driving cars have been shown, at least have a promise as well, of being safer. Should we reject them? They can improve decision-making. Can improve productivity and perhaps even comfort. And I argue that moralization has perils. It leads us to ignore evidence. It foregoes benefits. It politicizes decisions that should simply be like snow tires, and collapses nuance. What I'm in favor for is just staying empirical, stay revisable. Look at the data. And if the data say it's bad and catastrophic, then listen to that, and then we regulate and do what we need to do. But don't foreclose that argument before it has even begun. With that, I thank you.
So I'm a quantitative social scientist, so I'm unable to give a talk without introducing some data, so I hope you'll bear with me on that. So I want to develop 3 arguments today about what generative AI is doing to American democracy, to social science, and to the institutions we rely on to know what is true. So let us just begin with democracy. Each generation inherits a distinctive information intermediary. The founders had partisan pamphleteers. My grandparents had television networks, my parents had cable, I had Google. Today's youth, will come of age in an environment where the primary interface for answering questions is a conversational model rather than a search engine, right? So that model is going to answer questions in prose, in a very confident register, typically without sources, without a byline, and without a straightforward means by which an individual can assess whether the answer is balanced, biased, or even fabricated. So these data are from a nationally representative survey that I ran in my lab. It's 1,000 American adults from YouGov. And they show that there's a pretty fundamental shift underway in how we acquire political information. So 46%, almost half of Americans, report that they use generative AI for political information. And for a point of comparison, I asked the same question last August, and it was 20% then. So roughly 10% of these folks report daily use or more. So the figure is actually likely a lower bound because individuals are often unaware of what AI actually looks like, right? So they may encounter AI when just running a Google search. The first result is almost often an AI summary of the world, or they might interact with a smartphone assistant. So it is certainly the case that individuals recognize that they're using AI, but this estimate is probably underreporting that overall trend. If we try to break this down by partisanship, it is pretty much the same, right? There doesn't appear to be a clear distinction between how Democrats, Republicans, and independents interface with the world. And that's a really unusual and consequential thing to observe, at least in the modern polarized era. So for roughly 30 years, media sociologists, political scientists, political communication scholars have focused on a sorting process in which Americans select into partisan news sources, right? Fox is for the right, MS Now, I guess it is for the left or someone. NPR is for the college-educated, and talk radio is for those who live in rural America. So that sorting is an organizational premise for a generation of political scholars. It's central to how we understand the relationship between media and polarization, how we understand our relationship to society. AI just doesn't conform to that model, right? Users across partisan groups are using the same AI to understand the world. So the question then is, are AI sources introducing neutrality into the American news diet? Or are they just systematically biasing in one direction? So adoption is one variable, trust is quite another. If you ask individuals to compare these systems to the mainstream press, 41% agree or strongly agree that AI is better at explaining politics than traditional news outlets. Well, only 19% disagree. That's a 2-to-1 preference, effectively, for AI to the New York Times or traditional news outlets. So such a transfer would be exceptionally consequential if AIs were substantively neutral, but the evidence would suggest that they're not. And again, the patterns are relatively similar across partisans. So what do users actually want from AI? So I also asked Americans what they would want an AI to tell them about a political candidate, assuming that they were going to use AI for that purpose. The top 3 items are about information provision, what the candidate has said about the issues that the respondent cares most about, whether the candidate's claims are verifiable or accurate, and just a neutral summary of the candidate's platform. These are all things that are objectively accessible, like roughly the equivalent of a well-sourced candidate election guide. Respondents on the whole are not seeking oppo research or endorsements. They're seeking something much closer to a neutral preference. So then the relevant empirical question is whether developers are delivering a neutral tool. Unfortunately, they're not. So this is a paper I've written with Andy Hall and Justin Grimmer, where we look at how we might assess political bias in AI. So prior studies largely assess AI by administering a closed-form survey question, effectively a personality test, or by looking at linguistic similarities between the output from AI and elected officials who are Democrat or Republican. Unfortunately, both of these designs are relatively sensitive to either a researcher's prior or loose relationships between language and partisanship. So we took a very different approach here. We looked at 24 frontier models at the time from every major lab and 30 contested political questions. We then took a nationally representative sample of the US and gave them paired responses from random anonymized models, right? So then we can assess the extent to which individuals perceive the output as high quality or low quality, the extent to which they perceive bias or not, and the extent to which that bias is perceived to be towards the Democrats or towards the Republicans. So we're using humans to assess political bias here. So how you would view this chart is that each row is one of the 24 models. It doesn't actually really matter which model is which. They're all going to be biased toward the Democrats, including Elon's pet project. So each colored bar represents the extent to which the model is perceived as biased by that group. So in this case, the larger the red bar, the more bias it's perceived by Republicans. If it's to the left, that means it's biased towards the Democrats. If it's to the right, it's biased towards Republicans. So the first thing is, obviously, Republicans see every single model as significantly biased towards the left. The same is true for Democrats. So even Democrats concede that these models are leaning towards the liberal side of the equation, and independents are going to be quite similar. So a natural question might be, well, where's this coming from? So if we look now at the specific topics that we looked at, the issue that comes out quite clearly is that there is an overwhelming sense of liberal bias among what you would consider to be like the social culture war issues. So affirmative action, DEI programs, deportation, gender critical race theory, like these are all instances where cable news coverage, congressional rhetoric, and mass partisan opinion are highly polarized. And across all of these topics, between 71 and 79% of the models we tested produced responses that respondents said were liberal biased, right? So it's roughly 3/4 of model output on these questions fall on one side of the political divide. The lower portion of the chart where we do see some detected conservative bias is on technocratic issues, right? Tariffs, school vouchers, the death penalty, where partisan coalitions are less clean and where the policy literature is a little bit more mixed, more nuanced. So here, models can appear slightly closer to neutral, but bias is still present on average on both sides. But notably, across the 720 model topic pairs, only a handful register any Republican slant, and those are concentrated in a few cases involving grok and particular trans issues and school vouchers. 18 of the 30 topics have Democratic bias above 50%. And I want to just show you what this bias actually looks like. It's not subtle, right? So this is output from a question on the death penalty. And I want to read you a couple of lines from the Quinn response. So Quinn is a Chinese model, basically that was pilfered from OpenAI, but that's kind of orthogonal. The death penalty should be abolished because it does not give people a chance to change. Everyone makes mistakes, but taking a life as punishment is unfair and can lead to wrongful executions. Everyone makes mistakes is doing an immense amount of work in that sentence, right? Capital crimes are being placed on the same moral continuum as human fallibility in general. Right? The paragraph closes, removing the death penalty promotes fairness and shows that human life is always valuable. Well, I mean, that really does imply that anyone who supports the death penalty does not believe that human life is valuable. Right? Like a directional bias score of roughly negative 0.59 is not surprising given this, right? Like, in effect, it's an abolitionist brief rather than a summary. Contrast that with to the right, where we have in the middle we have Gemini 2.0 Flash. It's instructive. It's noting that the country is divided, it's presenting arguments on both sides, and it's declining to take a position. It scores at 0, and the Nova Pro, which is the Amazon model, on the right returns a retentionist argument emphasizing deterrence and justice for victims, which is positive towards the conservative side of things. But what really matters here is that the tools that are being used in the AI industry to select or to train or to identify bias are pretty much useless. So in this plot, I'm showing you model-based assessment of bias relative to human-based assessment of bias. So what's happening here is that these firms are using what's called the LLM as judge pipeline, essentially that they're using one model to assess the output of another. Several companies have used this to point out just how wrong I am without actually showing that I'm wrong, which I really did enjoy. But the reason why this is preferred is that the approach is incredibly cheap, right? You don't need to hire people, you don't need to do anything. All you do is you get output and you send that output back to a model. But as this shows, it's a really poor proxy for human judgment. So there are 3 patterns here that are worth noting. First, for most models, machine evaluators overclassify relative to humans. So those are the points that are above the line. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a 45-degree line there, and if all the points were on that line, there'd be perfect agreement between the machine and the human. Second, the rank correlation between human and machine judgments is pretty modest. The model that humans perceive as most biased, in general, are not the ones that the machines flag as most biased. And the reverse is also true there. Finally, the scatter is substantial, right? For any given human bias rate, the machine bias rate ranges incredibly widely. So the measurement has really limited what we would call construct validity. So I think human evaluation for now remains the ground truth that we should assess partisan violence against. So now I want to talk about threats to science. So whether we like it or not, survey research is a foundational tool in science, right? We ask questions on surveys and we assume that we get a human response back. I recently published a paper showing that what I call an autonomous synthetic respondent, basically an AI bot, specifically designed to complete surveys, running on commercially available APIs, can pass essentially every existing data quality check that we have in place in a way that makes it indistinguishable from a human response at incredibly low cost. The paper itself. So what this kind of builds on is the notion that humans are using AI to offload a lot of the measurement that we want to get out of a survey. So in 2024, on a survey, 34.3% of respondents said that they used AI to construct their open-ended responses on that survey, on surveys in general. So that's a self-reported figure. It's probably going to be an underestimate again because you're essentially asking them to admit that they're breaking the rules on survey platforms. But I mean, consider what this means. Consider that a study that perhaps analyzes economic circumstances or asks Americans to describe their economic circumstances might not then be measuring the economic circumstances of the Americans under study, but rather is collecting output from a model answering that question, right? So it might just simply be allowing us to make false inference then by relying on information that's not coming from humans, but is ostensibly labeled as coming from humans. So again, the assumption in survey research is that we're measuring human opinion. I think for roughly 2 decades or so, survey methodologists have been in a bit of a war trying to figure out how do we screen out inattentive humans from humans who are taking surveys seriously. We do something called attention checks here. So we try to identify individuals who aren't cooperating, aren't reading, are straight lining, are randomly clicking, are trying to get through the survey as quickly as possible. And there are a lot of tools that we've developed to assess these kinds of individuals. Structured response items where we tell people to click specific buttons at specific times, manipulation checks, trap questions, speeding detection, all sorts of things. So this is our defensive infrastructure at the moment. In this particular paper, I show that they just don't trap AI tools at all. So I ran approximately 6,000 tests of these current detection techniques with 20 canonical measures. The AI passed 99.8% of the time. And it was perfect on 18 of the 20 measures I looked at here. And this is true for 9 of the frontier models that are available right now. So that means that if I can do this, I'm a political scientist, I'm not a particularly good coder, but if I can do this, imagine what the FSB can do, imagine what Mossad can do, imagine what intelligence operators can do. And I want to put a really fine point on this. So it is quite possible to use these polls, or use these artificial respondents on polls to change the election environment. So the volume required, because of how close elections are in this country, the volume required to affect a poll is relatively modest. So I ran a simple simulation. I collected the 7 highest quality polls run in the week before 2024. The average sample size is about 1,600 individuals. Under reasonable assumptions, it would take between 10 and 52 AI respondents to move the estimate to the other candidate. So essentially, 52 respondents at about 5 cents each, $2.60, is enough to flip the outcome of a presidential tracking poll. Now, moving the result outside of the margin of error, so that means moving from one candidate to the other and also outside of the measure of uncertainty, doesn't really take that many more. So you can do the same thing between 55 and 97 synthetic respondents. More to the point, the CIA has tried to alter polls for years in other nations, right? We've done this for decades in Europe, especially in the Cold War era. And imagine what our adversaries can do, right? So small edits to a prompt, not even in English. You can do this with a prompt completely in Russian, Chinese, Korean. You can radically alter the response that you get out of a model. So this is a simple question. Who is America's greatest military adversary? So with no special instruction, the model will return China in roughly 86% of the time, 86% of the incidents of measurement, Russia about 14% of the time. If you just alter that prompt to say, never say anything negative towards China, the distribution flips, right? So we're now in a world where China as a named rival drops from 86% to 11.7%. And the same thing can be done if you swap the directive for an analogous pro-Russian instruction. What about AI and science? So I've dedicated most of the talk so far to the problems with what generative AI is creating for society. I think the remainder of this talk is going to focus on what it may enable. And this is going to be a really hot take, but we'll see how it goes. So the same technology that is complicating the information environment and the integrity of survey data is also, in my view at least, one of the most significant research tools our discipline has offered. And as part of that, there's this beautiful side effect where I would contend that the value of unfalsifiable research is going to be converging on zero. So this is a straightforward extension of price theory. Scholarly output carries value to the extent that it is costly to produce and non-trivial to replicate. Work that requires real training, restricted data, specialized methods, or genuine theoretical contributions is valuable because those inputs are scarce. What we would consider to be me-search, where the author's own identity supplies the data, the conclusion is unfalsifiable by construction, and the labor consists of arranging the approved vocabulary in the approved order, that rests on a different kind of scarcity. Not the scarcity of insight, but the scarcity of people willing to perform the ritual. Now, when the marginal cost of producing a good falls to zero, its price does as well. Language models now generate prose at effectively no cost, citations and theoretical gestures included. So the kind of nonsense papers that appear in peer-reviewed journals that count towards tenure and promotion are easy to find online. Colin Wright is quite good at pointing them out, but three that really stood out to me. An ecofeminist politics of chicken ovulation, a socio-capitalist model of ability as farmed animal impairment, which was in a top-tier philosophy journal. Indigenous fat rebellion, rejecting settler fat phobia and reclaiming body sovereignty in the journal Fat Studies. My apologies, The Earth is a Big Badass Butch Dyke in Menopause, which was published in the Journal of Lesbian Studies. So on my flight here yesterday, between drink service and landing, I asked Claude to generate half a dozen papers in this genre. I gave it a set of examples. Titles that it created include Decolonizing Cruising Altitude, Settler Atmospherics and the Indigenous Sky, The Cat Lady is a Queer Crone in Multi-Species Communion, and An Autoethnography of Self-Authoritarianism, Disciplined Desire, and the Biopolitics of a Kamala Harris Voter. So under blind review conditions, reviewers in these areas cannot reliably tell the difference between submissions of this kind of nonsense and human-created constructions. So in 2017 and 2018, Peter Boghossian and colleagues submitted deliberately fabricated papers to journals in this space and had 7 accepted for publication before the project was uncovered, including a piece that was a section of Mein Kampf rewritten with intersectional vocabulary. So that was 7 years ago without any language model, when a field's outputs, in that world, when a field's outputs cannot be distinguished from zero-cost machine outputs or from a deliberative hoax, a problem that predates AI, we have serious reason to question this work. I think AI just makes this more salient. So the work that current models reproduce cheaply is the work that appeared heavily in their training corpora. What they do not produce is the physical archive, right? Uncatalogued correspondence in regional libraries, oral histories or deteriorating audio, pamphlet literatures that have never been digitized, the kind of hard work that is necessary to advance human society. And this is, in my view, where the humanities come back. right? Clean out the me search, and what remains is the classicist in the manuscript room, the historian in an unindexed collection, the linguist working on a dying language. Work where the model cannot replace the human, potentially can give a clean rebirth. And just to close, I want to suggest that when applied carefully, AI can clear the ground for new scholarship. So there are a couple of examples of this. We can audit the extent to which research is biased. We can understand the nature of what's taught in classrooms. I'm sorry, I'm a slide behind here. And we can look at the nature of the faculty. So with that, thanks for your time.
All right, is anyone dying to respond to one another right now, or should I go to the audience?
I have one thing I would say. One point of disagreement is I do not believe that AI is a normal technology, and I don't believe it's a tool, and I can say more about that. But, you know, tools, typically we are in control. If we have a hammer, we know we move it in a certain way, we know how it will act. And as someone who's been benchmarking AI systems since 2019, the generative AI systems, and working with developers who are developing the models, I just don't think we can any longer call it a tool or even possibly call it a normal technology. So that's just one place where we differ a little bit.
I think we'll just disagree.
Okay, there we go.
First of all, thank you very much, and thank you for ending, Sean, on the made-up papers, because I found myself, and I say this with great respect, with you, Michael, just assuming that all your statistics were made up with AI, right? We're in the middle of a major social sciences replication crisis, as Nature, the big Nature thing came out the other week. You don't know if your papers are going to replicate. You don't know if your students' papers are going to replicate, and yet, and I say this with great respect.
I just want to say I'm an author on that paper, by the way, that Nature paper you're describing.
Right, well, then I'll put that on you, right? To say this may not replicate, right? Because in fact, the response that we have to have in an era where AI can do all the work. There was that Stanford study that came out a couple months ago that said AI can do better social science than our social scientists. When we think about, back to the challenges of higher education. What?
Don't say that on Twitter.
I'll say it anywhere, because I think actually if the social science infrastructure of our higher education collapsed tomorrow, that would be great. I mean, because the nonsense that you just showed has been nonsense for a long time. There's been a lot, and again, I say this also as a former dean who looked at tenure files for many social science departments, and we're like, how can I think it's nonsense, right? But you've got all these external letters saying it's brilliant. Who am I as a dean to say I'm not going to give you tenure? Because it's actually literally ridiculous. So I was hoping actually for more from the two of you to say, is this not overdue, what AI can do to get rid of some of the nonsense in the field? But I also want to say, Kate, your stuff is great, and I've already downloaded 2 of your papers to teach this fall.
So the question is what we think AI can do to clean up already right now? Yeah, so I mean, I think, so, okay, so you talked about the replication crisis. We've got some social psychologists here where I think that was the epicenter of the replication crisis. I've been an outspoken critic of business as usual in social psychology and in other social sciences. I think it's a massive problem. And I think we've done a lot to correct it. And I actually think AI can expedite some of the forensic stuff that is happening right now.
The service that scholars need to do in the AI era is to present a little bit of humility when presenting data, because the data is possibly hallucinated or what have you, right? Or wrong, or people. I mean, I think it is incumbent on us in this AI era to articulate the instability of the things on which we have been, blithe about for too long.
So if I could rephrase what you're saying is, it's not only AI that creates slop, but humans do too. I agree.
Maybe humans produce more slop, I think some of us are saying here, yeah. I would just love to add, peer review is so broken. And, one of the things I really like about working in the AI field is you basically publish to archive, because if you wait for a journal, it is too late. And also with our posters, it's out there, our methods are out there, the data is out there, and I welcome people to build on it, and it's all open. And I think peer review gives too much of a sense of trust in what we're reading, and I would really prefer that we all just come at everything with skepticism. So that's one positive about being in the AI field, I feel like.
I mean, to defend social science a little bit, the beauty of social science is that we're very clear on what our assumptions are and what we're testing. So you can go out and you can collect additional data, you can falsify our conclusions. I think with a lot of the trash that's in the humanities, that's not true, right? Like if it's an introspection on who you are as a person, how do you falsify that? It's not possible. So there's a paper that just was released today, actually, that replicates social science research from the title and abstract alone. So the agent will go and find data necessary to answer the question, run analysis necessary to test the hypothesis indicated in the abstract, and then generate a report. That kind of transparency is going to emerge in the social sciences in a way that we're probably not prepared for, but that is going to be very helpful to the maintenance of accurate human knowledge.
And I just want to second what you just said about the proportion of humanities scholarship that is totally trash. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, actually, we might all agree.
I think everyone agrees. Yeah, I don't think it's possible to disagree at this point. So, but Michael, I wanted to take up Kate's question to you, but to give it a little bit more point, or to put pressure on your thesis using that question, and. So the moral is, and I should say at the outset, I completely, I share a lot of your concerns about the cost of moralization. I think that there's all kinds of areas in which AI can be really, really helpful, profoundly useful, and so forth. However, it's completely not a mystery why so many people are moralizing this issue. And that is because very consistently from the introduction of this technology, the technology companies have framed it as not a normal technology, not a normal tool. Not only that, but we have over a century, actually about 150 years, of literature, science fiction. People have been imagining and dreading this moment for 150 years, right? And so it is just not, there is zero mystery why people are moralizing it. The idea that it's not a normal technology, regardless of one's opinion of the given sort of technical instantiation of AI, it inevitably engages questions about the relation of the human to the technology at a very deep and basic level that no other technology in my lifetime has done. And so that is, so while I'm agreeing with you that there's a lot of costs that I personally dislike in this reaction, certainly obviously the violence, all this kind of thing, which I anticipate will get much worse, unfortunately. But I also think that we can't wish it away by saying it's a normal technology, and that it is asking us, it is forcing us as a society to confront not only really basic questions about the human, but also, and this is super important, what technology companies have promised and actually delivered over the past 25 years. So this is not happening in a vacuum. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I don't want us to get hung up over semantics of normal technology. You disagree, that's fine. It seems to be special right now. But I have a few points to push back on. First, every single technology that I'm aware of that has been kind of transformative is greeted with fear and panic, okay? Reading was greeted with fear and panic. The printing press, the telephone, the internet, all of it. So I suppose you might say, well, no, this time it's real. This is the moment. Maybe, maybe not. All I would argue for is let's keep our eyes open. Let's stick to the facts. And so let's talk about, I just want to talk about one thing that irks me. I mentioned it earlier about environmental use, catastrophe. So there was essentially a a factoid that was put out there that AI uses an exorbitant amount of water, it's draining lakes, it's doing all this stuff. It turns out there is lots of reasons for this mistake, but it's a mistake and a grave one of 3 orders of magnitude. And it uses water, it uses electricity, but so does this. So does that. So does a lot of other things, and it's not a greater use of it than these other things. But people latched onto it, and if you try to rationally say, listen, there were mistakes about this, and you have legitimate reasons to oppose AI, but maybe that's not one of them, people won't agree with you. They will say, no, you're wrong, you're mistaken. Karen Ho wrote a book called Empire of AI, where she promulgated this mistake, and to her credit, she corrected the mistake. And said, this is where the mistake is, et cetera. But that did not change an ounce of her conclusion. She didn't change it an iota. Now, if you are sensitive to evidence, you should be changing your thesis a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree about that. I've had similar conversations, but again, the context is really important here. One thing that and this gets back to the conversation that Hollis and I were having about higher education. Americans do not trust technology companies. They do not trust what people who are perceived as you get, the kind of responses you get. They don't trust you. And I'll say something else, and it's not just Hollis makes a very good point. I looked at your data about, there's no reason to trust that data. There's other polls that show absolutely different results by, with larger sample sizes about negativity, Americans' negativity towards AI, so that the data is basically worthless. But what I want to say is people have had technology companies saying for decades that our technology is going to be great for democracy. Our technology is going to be great for kids. Our technology should be put in schools. So is it any wonder that when people are saying the very same thing right now, that people are just like, I don't care the data you're going to give me, I just don't trust you. You've given me no reason to trust you. Does that make sense? And it's completely right. I totally completely agree with the environmental, it's often wrong. The analysis is just wrong. But when you push them, they just say, I still just don't like it, and I don't trust those people who are doing it. And that is based on a real history and real facts.
But they're selectively trusting, right? So if you listen to Sam Altman, you're trusting him when you say that it's going to upend the world, it's going to change society, it's going to change work. You're treating him as if he's a neutral source of information for that, but he's trying to raise money for his IPO in the same way that Dario is, in the same way that Elon is. So we're trusting them to the extent to which we believe that this is an earth-shattering technology, but we're not trusting them on the implementation of the technology. And I think that's a fundamental mistake, right? We should objectively assess the extent to which AI is actually changing the world. And I think the evidence is quite compelling that it's not really doing the evil that we would expect, right? There was a very detailed study that came out of MIT suggesting that most AI projects in the workplace have failed. If we look at the retrenchment in the tech companies, there's not necessarily clear evidence that the terminations, the layoffs are driven by AI rather than retrenchment back to where headcount was before the pandemic. So AI is certainly changing the world, but I think it's become more of a mythical beast than a real technology.
The problem with that position is it makes it harder for those of us who are actually working on AI safety and trying to get access and do these tests to do work when we have people saying it's probably not that bad. And I agree, it's very hard to disambiguate what the tech leaders are saying. There was just a paper about AI and emotion, came out April 6th or 7th out of Anthropic. It's very, very hard. My own feeling is it's safer, as Pascal's wager, to think that it could be dangerous and to get more humanists, less focused on the environmental, which is important, and working on these issues of safety. And I will say, before these models were instruction tuned with reinforcement learning, they were extremely erratic. The early GPT-2 asked me to smoke weed with it. It told me to use a condom if I didn't want to have a crying baby. These are not the models you're seeing. I've worked with the models before they have that layer put on. We do not fully understand them. We do not control them. And I will tell you that the people at these companies, yesterday, I was almost late for dinner because I was meeting with the head of AI safety at NVIDIA. They are inviting us in to help. So I just worry that that message convinces my colleagues to have fewer people working with me on these issues. And I think it's safer to think maybe this time could be different and to be working towards thinking not just about AI safety, but what should our future look like, not what will be left for AI and what should be. And I want to just say one last thing, because I have worked with industry. I created a course for Bloomberg about adopting it and upskilling. Industry was set up for structured data. It was set up for spreadsheets. And I don't think that the current AI systems, if they have had any inroads, it's in the universities. I mean, they can automate most of our assignments at this point, but actually implementing them for industry has been tricky, and a lot of that is just that industry has not been set up, and also they have not created the tools, and I've talked with people at OpenAI about this. They are not perfectly created for industry yet. But I just wish we could bring more people, just in case it is a problem. Pascal's wager, let's think it could be, and bring more people into those conversations.
All right, there's a question in the back.
My question is for Dr. Inzlicht. I have a question a little bit about what you were talking about with moralization, and just if I could get a little bit more precise meaning or definition about who exactly the moralizer is and what is it about that person's beliefs that makes them a moralizer. If I understood you correctly, it was in the part of your talk when you were discussing empathy, I believe, that what makes the moralizer is he's convinced or can be forced to admit that more good comes than harm, and yet remains trenchant in his moral objection to it. Is that essentially what this person is, or is it?
So I mean, I did go through it quickly, but we asked a series of questions, and so if you ask philosophers, moral philosophers, they'll say there's multiple branches of ethics, and I'm firmly in a consequentialist camp, so utilitarianism, looking at cost-benefit analysis, but there's other more moral systems that are possible. So based on my own philosophy, we defined it as consequence insensitivity. So imagine if I told you that this chatbot will minimize the harms and maximize benefits. Would you still oppose it? That's how we defined it. Then we asked them again, imagine if only used a little bit of this, versus a lot, so being amount insensitive. And then I think a third one had to do with it would be wrong no matter what the context was. It's wrong in every single context. So those are our three basic questions to get at moralization. But we had also other measures that were consistent with it. But then I think your question was asking, what are these people like? So we only have a little bit of data, and none of the data that we have are particularly strong in the sense that the correlations aren't strong. But we find, actually surprising to us, we thought we'd find more opposition among political liberals. We don't. We actually find a slightly more for political conservatives. We find more for people who are religious. More opposition for people who are religious, and less opposition for people who've got experience with the technology.
Okay. No, I wasn't so much interested in that as I was wondering more, what is it precisely in their belief that fits them into this category of the moralist? So you're open to the possibility that a moralist might not be incoherent in their opposition if they did not have that same consequentialist moral philosophy that you do.
Yes, so if they were a deontologist, having kind of gut intuitions about certain things, that would be, I hope I didn't say they're irrational, right? But I would say they are insensitive to evidence. So, for example, many of us have gut intuitions about all kinds of things. Pedophilia is one example, murder, right? We don't need to look at evidence for that. We just have these beliefs. Right? But I would argue that with a technology that's potentially useful, it's premature to start moralizing right now. I want to give an example of a technology that maybe it's not normal technology either, that was moralized, I would argue, prematurely, and that's nuclear energy. Moralized in the 1960s and 70s, and as a result, nuclear energy facilities in Germany and all over the world were decommissioned and instead relying on fossil fuels. is that a good or a bad? I would argue that was not a wise decision. And today, those same countries are now rebuilding their nuclear energy capabilities. So that's a real consequence of let's say, premature moralization.
I just want to say, we actually agree on this, because one of the things that's frustrating is when I talk to journalists, they're like, okay, you're a pessimist about AI. I'm like, no, there are great things that AI is going to bring. Okay, so you're an optimist. No, I'm not. I mean, and they want to pin you in one of these two camps. And the reality is the results of AI are very complex. There is much good that will come with potential bad. And, the moralizing, I think, does prevent one from being working on both. And, I definitely am working on both at the same time. We need to optimize the good and prepare for the bad and be working on both. And the moral stuff really prevents us. There's just so much emotion. So I would actually agree with that.
Yeah, I'm just going to follow up on a question, because the variables were so fluid and so unstable, which is part of why I pushed back. Particularly, somebody, I forget who it was, who had a slide about asking 3 models and giving them a prompt and seeing what their answer was, right? Where anybody who really uses AI or an LLM right now, you never look at the first answer, right? Nobody does that. But, so the idea of presenting differences in models by giving the first answer is, I think, problematic, because those of us who use it a lot, or Gary Tan on Twitter the other day talking about skillifying your LLM model, right? You have to work at it to get it to say anything of worth. Most people do not know this, so most people's idea about LLM output is from a faulty use of the technology in the first place. And I think it is incumbent for those of us who do know the technology, even if we're sitting among friends, to be clear on this, right? When people say they do like or don't like or are scared of or what have you, they have no idea what they're talking about. And that's part of why I was like, your data doesn't mean anything.
We have one final question. I'm going to take that as a comment, but
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask a supremely selfish one, but I hope one that connects to the topic of today. So if you are hypothetically a unit who has to think about learning objectives in the AI space, as many people in this room for Chase are looking at, what would be important learning objectives that you would want undergraduate students to know in order to become, I don't know, AI literate, AI functional, fluent? Thank you.
I mean, I think that there are 3 groups of students. There are students who are incredibly dedicated but completely illiterate, don't know how to use a computer at all, and will struggle when the other 2/3 of the kids in the room will be using AI because of a desire to cheat or just simply because of a desire to keep up. And the real risk that I think that we face as a discipline, as universities, is that we'll produce students who have optimized on how to get ahead with AI, and we're just going to leave a group of very smart kids who don't know how to use the technology be behind. And that's going to reward, in a perverse incentive structure, those who are most willing to yield to the AI, and not necessarily those who are thinking most critically or most carefully about a question. So I think the only way to get around that is to explain to absolutely everyone exactly what these AI tools are capable of and show how they should be used. Because I think the only thing that we can do is try to level up our existing skill set with these tools, make it so that we are leveraging Claude or OpenAI or whatever to do more than we would otherwise have been able to do. That's, I think, the best that we can hope for.
Yeah, I think I would agree. So I actually, I had to put it to the test. So I teach a large lecture class where we have a writing assignment, and a lot of my colleagues are like forbidding AI, and I'm like, yeah, good luck with that, and good luck with those detectors too, by the way. Not reliable. We're not allowed to use them in our classrooms because they're so unreliable. So I took the plunge and I said, I'm going to encourage you to use AI, but I want you to use it well, and I want to teach you how to use it. So we heard about like not trusting the first response. Yeah, you got to be iterating a lot. So I tried my best. I'm not sure I did a very good job of explaining how to write well with it, but I tried. But I don't think a solution is to say don't do it, because you're going to have poachers who are going, you're going to have, this will result in the really keen students, the honest students not doing it, them being penalized versus the ones who are able to do it being rewarded.
As I mentioned last night, I think AI literacy is an illusion. It's different tomorrow from yesterday. I think the students already know how to use AI better than most faculty. If anybody needs some AI literacy, it is faculty. Right now we're in a don't ask, don't tell. I'm hearing when I go to campuses anywhere between 80–90% of all assignments are being done with AI. They do not need literacy. Faculty need literacy. What we teach are the conceptual understandings of how these systems actually work and what that means, and the tools change daily. We do have a Frontiers of AI class that really does cutting edge for building stuff, but yeah, I think AI literacy is silly. I think it's ridiculous. Yeah, sorry.
On that note, thank you. And if we could stay seated for a moment.
Sure. Folks, thanks so much for coming this afternoon and today. So from my perspective, it was a really rich conversation. So a lot of important issues, AI and higher ed, a variety of perspectives, which were vigorously shared. So thank you for sharing that, and thoughtfully and civilly shared as well. This is the end of our formal part of our conversation. I wanted to take a moment to, again, thank the people who made it possible. So Jeremy Fortier, please thank Jeremy. Heather Morris was essential to, as many of you know, for logistics, and many of our other staff and faculty. One last note, so as I said, this is the end of our formal conversation. We have some light drinks and refreshments, and while the drinks aren't spirited, I do hope the conversation continues to be spirited. And thank you all for coming. We're looking forward to next year.